Well, this month in Sunday worship, we've been looking at some passages in Luke's Gospel, and under this title, this series, Your Kingdom Come. And the idea is that we are looking at things in the Gospel which will help us to understand and get excited about and apply our church action plan, which we adopted at the December church meeting. We read about Jesus' baptism and how that showed that Jesus is the focus of the kingdom as God's king. Remember, Jesus received the Spirit as he came up out of the water, and there was that voice, "This is my son," God's king, Jesus as God's king, and how that encourages us in our first goal of the action plan of inviting people to become followers of Jesus. Then we looked at Jesus reading from the scroll and how he read that passage which spoke about God's kingdom. It said that the Spirit of the Lord is on me to do what? To preach good news to the poor, liberty for the captives. And we saw how Jesus was living that message out. But we also saw that there were others who were not part of the disciples group who were doing similar things. Different people, different groups, but they were still working in line with the kingdom. And that's point 2 of our action plan. We're thinking about how we can get alongside and work with those who perhaps aren't necessarily Christian groups, but groups that are working for the values of God's kingdom. And then last week we read about how Jesus healed people, showing the care of God's kingdom, and how it showed us that God's care and compassion really was for everyone, whether it was that important Roman officer or whether it was that lowly widow who had now lost her son. God showed compassion in Jesus. And so that's what our third goal is about, showing that kind of pastoral support to those who use our premises. So in our reading so far, we've been seeing that many people were excited about Jesus. They were very positive about what was going on. They hoped that Jesus would be the one to help them and save them. And sure enough, here comes Jesus helping and healing. But we also know, those of us that have been around for a little bit, that there were people, perhaps many people, who didn't appreciate what Jesus was doing. They weren't happy with what Jesus was up to. And we're going to hear some words now from Luke chapter 7 that David's going to read for us.
Luke chapter 7, verses 31 to 35. And the Lord said, "What shall I say about the people of this time? What can I compare them to? What are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace. One group of children calls to the other children and says, 'We played flute music for you, but you did not dance. We sang a sad song, but you did not cry.' John the Baptizer came and did not eat the usual food or drink wine, and you say, 'He has a demon inside him.' The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and you say, 'Look at him, he eats too much and drinks too much wine. He is a friend of tax collectors and other sinners.' But wisdom is shown to be right by those who accept it." Thanks be to God.
Jesus is upset. People are complaining. People are complaining about him. But Jesus isn't upset because he wants a 5-star rating on kosherrabbis.com. Jesus is upset because people, especially the religious people, just don't seem to understand what John was doing, John the Baptist, and what he has been doing. He compares the people here to sort of kids squabbling in the marketplace. "Oh, well, we played happy flute music for you, and you didn't dance. Well, we sang a sad funeral song, and you didn't cry." What's he saying? Well, let me illustrate perhaps with a little bit of Armenian music. We're going to listen to one track now, and I suppose John's music was a bit like this. How does that feel? Bit sad? John ate locusts. John wore the scratchy camel jackets, and John was the sad music. He was telling people that they needed to change their lives or face God's fire. It wasn't a cheery message. But the religious people thought they were just fine. So they didn't really like John. Well, what about this music instead? How did that feel? Come on, did you get a bit of foot tapping going there? Yeah, if you had Armenian blood in you, you should have been tapping your foot to that one. It feels completely different, doesn't it? They're both flute, sort of flute-type instruments, and yet one is sad. Well, this one is happy. This was Jesus' style. He was going to the parties. He was welcoming people who were considered to be far from God, unspiritual, hopeless people. And the religious people, well, they didn't like him either for that. That didn't seem very godly. The problem, of course, was that they were stuck in their religion, in their understanding of religion. They couldn't see another way. They lost sight of God and of God's mission to save his people. And actually, that's why Jesus told that parable about our friend here who's now fast asleep, which I'm sure we all know very well. We're going to watch a little animation of it and then think about how this connects with what we're talking about here. It's a nice little animation, isn't it? And I think it captures the worry and the suspense and the joy of what Jesus was telling in that story. At the back, we've got some colouring pages which cover those emotions. Jesus says, suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. What do? You leave the other 99 in the pasture and go looking for the one that got lost until you find it. And when you find it, you're so happy that you put it on your shoulders and carry it back home. And then you call your friends and neighbours together and say to them, I'm so happy I found my lost sheep. Let's celebrate. We know this story, and it's a lovely story of God's care and kindness towards us. But why did Jesus tell this story? Who does he tell it to? Because actually, he doesn't tell it to the bad guys, the people who need to hear about God going and searching for them. At the beginning of Luke 15, it says this: one day, when many tax collectors and other outcasts came to listen to Jesus, the Pharisees and the teachers of the law started grumbling. Oh, this man welcomes outcasts and even eats with them. So Jesus told them this parable. This is why Jesus tells the parable of the lost sheep and the parable of the lost coin and the parable of the lost sons. Jesus is telling these stories to the grumblers, to the people pointing the fingers at Jesus and at the people who weren't good enough for their particular form of religion. He's telling it to the people who've lost sight of what God's kingdom is all about. And actually, it is a surprising story. I mean, really, what shepherd would leave 99 sheep and go looking for that lost one sheep? But it's not a story to teach us farming skills. That's not really the point. The point of the story is to tell us what Jesus is doing, help us to understand why he should go after the lost. And that's why when Jesus finishes the little story, he says this: in the same way I tell you, there'll be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 respectable people who do not need to repent. The Pharisees, the religious teachers, they are complaining about Jesus going to dinner parties and hanging out with tax collectors and outcasts. And Jesus says, look, there's some serious partying going on in heaven when one of those people who you think is irretrievably lost is found. And this is the flexibility of God's kingdom. You know, the religious leaders, they're grumbling because Jesus doesn't fit with their traditions. But the problem isn't Jesus. The problem, of course, is their traditions. The way that they're running things means that the lost stay lost. The way that Jesus brings God's kingdom means that the lost are found. So what does all this have to do with the fourth goal of our action plan, which I'm sure you all know, right? Oh, just in case you don't, the fourth goal is this: encourage the further diversification of worship and events for specific target groups. And I suppose at first sight you might say, well, what does that have to do with people not dancing to happy music or not crying to sad music or crazy shepherds going to look for that lost sheep? But of course it has a lot to do with it. Because what we're saying with that fourth goal is that we need to be ready to do things differently if we're going to reach people. We can't allow ourselves to be stuck in tradition, as if being a Christian or being part of church is all about turning up at 10:30 a.m. on a Sunday morning. And perhaps over the last few years, Messy Church has been a good example of that. Messy Church isn't about getting people to come along to Messy Church on a Sunday afternoon so that eventually we can get them to come to church on a Sunday morning. Messy Church is church. Messy Church is a type of church. It has elements of worship and prayer. It has elements of fellowship. And yeah, perhaps we still need to work on deepening relationships within that congregation and understanding how we can grow deeper in God together. But the point is that is also church. That is part of our church. And perhaps we think of ourselves as Sunday morning is the kind of core congregation, and Messy Church as an outreach or something like that, which in a sense it is, but we can't lose sight of the fact that it is actually church. And we were having a conversation with the worship group recently, and Michael mentioned the fact, that in the Anglican Church, for years they have their two congregations, don't they? The Book of Common Prayer and the traditional service, and the one that comes later in the morning. We need to be ready, flexible, open to the idea of having different congregations, that it isn't all about 10:30 on a Sunday morning. And another example of this is the online worship. At the Elders Away Day, and again in a recent discussion in that worship group, we were talking about how what we did on the website, that type of worship, really did reach some people who perhaps had drifted away from church, or perhaps people who wouldn't necessarily be present here at church on a Sunday morning. And they might be people, it's connected with people for whatever reason don't come, or can't come, or wouldn't come to this place at 10:30 on a Sunday morning. But it is nevertheless meeting a need and drawing them in and helping them in their worship of God. But of course the problem is, I can't do both. So what if one Sunday morning, now and then, I leave the 99, there's not even 99 of you, is there? I leave the 99 and go off and put my time and effort into that kind of worship that would reach out to those people. How would we feel about that? Would we be grumbling like the Pharisees? Or would we jump for joy like the party in heaven? I'd like to say here, if you're going to jump for joy, I really hope it's because you're glad that other people are getting me, not because you're not getting me, right? But we need to think about how we can be flexible in the way that we're offering both worship and outreach. This is something we need to be seriously thinking about. It's about recognizing that one size doesn't fit all. And it's asking how we can offer worship and witness in different ways to different groups so that the good news can reach and touch more lives. Your kingdom come.